Hello, I'm Dr. Ron England, and I'm going to begin a series here on user controls. I've actually done a few lectures on user controls, but I want to kind of take you through some of the real capabilities of what you can do with user controls. So here I've got one of my projects. This is the Stormwater Management Project, and I've created a directory called user controls, and really the reason I've done that is I'd like to manage the location of my user controls. So I have an application directory here. And it's really easy to make a user control. Now, first the question would be, why would you want to make a user control? And what is a user control? Well, user control is essentially a group of objects that you've put together onto a page that you can then put onto other pages, and it has a specific behavior that's fixed every single time that you drop that user control onto a page. So what I like to do is, suppose I have an input screen. Well, instead of just dropping all the input forms and the labels and everything onto a page directly, I like to create a user control, and then I put that user control onto the page. It lets me manage that input. So I've got this user controls directory now, and I can go over here and say add, and I'm going to add a new item. And when I bring up the new items here, it's going to be web items, and there should be right here web user control. And I'm going to do one for circular pipe. So I have a naming convention. I like to do UC. That just tells me that it's a user control. And in this case, it's going to be an edit, because I'm going to have input labels and input text boxes. And then I'm going to have the name of the object that I'm actually editing in this case. And in this case, it's going to be for editing the values for doing a circular pipe calculator. So that is my naming convention. It makes it relatively easy to keep track of what this is. So UC, user control, edit, circular pipe. I hit add, and now I've actually got my blank screen where I can start putting in all my labels and text boxes. I'm going to spare you all the agony of me putting all those labels and text boxes on here, and we'll jump to the finished product of at least those labels, and we'll start from there. All right, so now I've jumped ahead, and I've created this form, and the form is simply the input parameters for my circular pipe. So it's diameter, a Manning's end, a slope, a flow, a depth. That really doesn't matter so much that you have those things. And I'm going to remove some of these things as I go along. Like this calculate pipe parameters isn't necessarily needed. I actually copied that from another thing, so I don't really need a button there. So if you look at this from the source view, you can see that I've basically got labels and text boxes, labels and text boxes. I've got a little indicator for required fields, but I didn't put any required field validators in this. One of the things you could do is put a required field validator. The reason I did not is I'm going to have this actually respond to a number of buttons. And when it responds to those buttons, some of the buttons are just to save it. Well, none of these fields are really required to save the data, and I would have to do some tricky validation to make that work. Now, you are going to actually see the use of these validators, but so at this point what you really have here is a table that I created with labels and text boxes in it. Now, if I move to the source code, though, there's something actually a little bit more going on behind the scenes. What I've done is this user control is really linked to this object, which is a circular pipe object, and that is a calculation object. That's the whole point of that object is to be able to calculate. So it takes in numbers, does some calculations, and gives you back numbers. This is a pretty common thing. You take in input, you do something, you give back output, and that output and input is all in the form of properties. So let me actually go to app code to that circular pipe. What I've done is a circular pipe actually inherits from channel, and flow, slope, Manning's end, depth, and velocity are some of the parameters. Velocity is a calculated parameter, and then I actually have this concept, for circular channel, I should have said circular channel, and it adds one more parameter to this, which is diameter, which is, because it's circular, it has a diameter. So these actually go together, and it doesn't matter that the names don't exactly match, but this object goes with the other object. And here's what I'm doing, and this is important here. I have the diameter as a property of the user control. So in other words, the user controls are just like other classes. They can have properties just like other classes can have properties. And if you looked at the circular channel back here, you'll notice that like flow is a property, slope is a property, Manning's N is a property, and it uses the default get set. So in other words, when you set that value, it just puts it into that double precision float there, flow. But when you look at this, this is where I can actually really do something with the accessors for properties. Properties have a get set accessor that allow you to set the values and get the values back. Well, the reality is that the diameter property is being saved in the text of a text box. So what I'm doing here is the get property returns this text, which is a string, in the text box diameter. It has to convert it to a double because the property is a double. And if it doesn't actually have anything there, it returns a 0. And when you set it, it converts the value, because the value is going to come in as a double. It converts it to a string and puts it in as the text. So I am able to use this as a series of properties, and you'll see how that's going to come in handy later when we start to actually use this user control. Well, now let's go to the very next step here where we're actually going to use the user control. I've created a page, an actual page underneath the calculators directory called calculate circular pipe. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to use that user control on that. In Visual Studio 2010, I had to do this by hand. Here it's really nice because I can just drop the user control onto it. If I go to user controls, I can take this user control and I can drop it where I want it to go. And it does two things. One is it actually puts the user control in here. UC1, UC edit circular pipe. So the user control is actually on the page. If I look at the design, again, the master page, there it is. Now, notice that all the formatting was the styles were applied to us. If I go back to the source, though, it also adds the register of this. In Visual Studio 2010, you had to do that by hand. Here, when you drop the page in there, it actually does it automatically. And it's pretty straightforward. Now, it says that it's actually not known, but the reality is that it is known. So now I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to actually I'm going to put some buttons and other things on this page, and I'm going to come back and show you how I'm using this user control to actually make a calculator. Okay, so now that I've dropped this user control onto the page and I've got the user control there available to the page, let's just look a little bit about what actually has to go on to be able to use a user control. So in a page, if you're going to use a user control, you have to register that user control on the page. So there's a register directive up here, and it has as the source the path of where the user control is, and then it uses this tag prefix and tag name. So just like ASP and then the name of like a checkbox or a text list is the same thing. So my tag prefix in this case is UC1, and the tag name is UC edit circular pipe. What that allows me to do is, here it is, right there. I wrapped it inside of a table just to make it look a little nicer. But there it is, UC1, and then the user control tag name, and that is the user control itself. So now that it's on the page, you've got the ability to do stuff with it. And I've written a little bit of code to be able to manipulate my object, which is the circular channel or circular pipe that we're working with. But in the case of the user control, as you remember, we put together, the user control had properties that returned back as doubles the information that was actually in those, the text boxes that were on the user control. So in this case, the object, or what we call the domain object, or the circular channel, here's the domain object, the channel that we're trying to set the properties of, can now be read directly off of that user control. And since I use the same names, it's relatively easy. So if I wanted to get the values from the user control to be able to calculate, let's say I have a calculate button and I want to be able to calculate the parameters, I have c.depth, okay, equals uc.depth, and so all those parameters can be set. Let's go one step further and let's actually look at this in action. Now I did add some other code that allows us to get outputs from this, which is kind of nice. But what we'll do here is we'll actually take a look at this. So if I put a 24 diameter inch pipe with a Manning's of 0.02 and a slope of 0.002 and a depth of, let's say, 1 foot, and I hit calculate, there's my results, and I actually have done some formatting there, and I created a table inside of a literal to do this, but there's those final results that go with this. Now, in some other lectures, I'll actually show how I did some of the interesting things that I did here. Like one is bringing up these properties automatically, not having to actually write specific code to do that, and then also the rounding and how to manage the rounding of the individual numbers. This is a really interesting. I've got this pipe calculator now that is built from a user control, but the real bottom line here is that this user control manages the user input that you've got for this, and it's a really useful and handy way to do this. Thank you very much, and this is all for this one lecture on user controls. Good programming. See you later. Bye.